My wife licked his bolt for so long that I wanted to strangle her. I never thought I'd be that guy, writing about his wife cheating on him on the internet. But here I am, sitting in the den of our house, well, my house now, trying to piece together how everything fell apart. To say I'm blindsided would be an understatement, though in hindsight, I can't believe I missed the signs. My wife, Emily, is, or at least was, beautiful, sharp-tongued, and effortlessly charming. We've been married for 8 years, and I thought we were solid. But I guess nobody ever really thinks their life is a deck of cards, one slight breeze away from tumbling. It all started innocently enough, or so I thought. Emily signed up for this evening French class a few months ago. She said it was to expand her horizons, and that learning a new language was something she'd always dreamed of. I was supportive, even proud of her for picking up a new hobby. Every Thursday evening, she'd grab her little notebook, a cup of tea in her hand, and head off to class. At first, it felt normal. Emily was her usual self, kind, attentive, and quick with a sarcastic comment that would make me laugh out loud. But then little things started to change. It was subtle at first. She began dressing nicer on Thursday nights. Not just throwing on a sweatshirt and jeans like before, but wearing fitted blouses, skirts, and even heels. When I teased her about it, she shrugged and said, "Just because I'm married doesn't mean I have to look like a slob." Fair point. But it nagged at me. The real kicker came 2 months into her class. One Thursday, she came home late. Really late. She claimed the class ran long and that the teacher, Pierre, of course his name is Pierre, was incredibly passionate about pronunciation. She went on and on about his dedication to the craft, but something about the way she said his name, with this little smile tugging at the corner of her lips, made my stomach flip. I'm not proud to admit it, but I Googled this Pierre guy. Turns out he's a young, charismatic instructor who moved here from Paris a year ago. His bio on the school's website boasted about his unique ability to inspire a love for the French language. I stared at his picture for a while. Lean build, messy brown hair, the kind of face that probably gets free drinks at bars. I brushed it off as jealousy, told myself I was being ridiculous. But then Emily's behavior shifted more noticeably. She started guarding her phone like it was a state secret, taking it with her everywhere, even the bathroom. She'd leave the room to take calls and always seemed to have a flirty energy about her on Thursdays. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it. Until last week, Emily had left for her French class, but forgot her notebook on the kitchen counter. I noticed it when I went to grab a snack. The notebook was open, and while I didn't mean to snoop, something caught my eye. Written in perfect cursive on the page were the words, "Tu me manques de, I miss you already." My chest tightened. Why would she write that? I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a phrase she learned in class. Maybe Pierre asked them to practice common expressions. But that phrase haunted me all night. I barely slept. By the time she came home, I was on edge. She walked in, cheerful as ever, carrying a small baguette in a paper bag, claiming Pierre had brought some for the class to try. She tossed out a quick kiss on my cheek and went straight to the bedroom without a second glance. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the notebook in my hand, feeling the weight of something unspoken hanging heavy between us. I didn't say anything to her that night, but something was gnawing at me. I needed to know the truth. The next day, I couldn't get the notebook out of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words. "Tu me manques déjà." I told myself it was innocent, that I was overreacting. But you know that little voice in the back of your head? The one that tells you when something's not right? It wouldn't shut up. Emily acted completely normal, which somehow made it worse. She wasn't jumpy or overly defensive like someone with a guilty conscience. If anything, she was more relaxed, humming while she cooked dinner, asking about my day like nothing was wrong. It felt off, like she was too at ease, knowing she'd pulled off whatever she was hiding. I decided I needed more information before jumping to conclusions. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm not the spy on your partner type. Emily and I have always been big on trust. But this was different. I needed to put my mind at ease, to prove to myself that my suspicions were baseless. While Emily was in the shower, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped it. Her passcode hadn't changed. Why would it? She had no idea I'd even be looking. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Her recent texts were mostly with her sister and a group chat with her friends. I was just about to put the phone down when I noticed a second messaging app, one I didn't recognize. The icon was plain, something I wouldn't have paid attention to if I wasn't looking for it. I opened it and instantly felt my stomach drop. There were messages with a contact saved as P. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through their conversation. Most of it was in French, phrases I could barely understand. But then I saw an image, a photo of Emily at what looked like a cafe. She was wearing the same blouse she'd worn to class last week, her hair falling perfectly over one shoulder. She wasn't smiling at the camera, though. She was smiling at someone behind it. I almost dropped the phone. The messages were vague enough that they could have been innocent. But that photo? It told a different story. And just as I was trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing, I heard the water shut off. I shoved the phone back on the nightstand and bolted to the kitchen, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I stood there, staring at the sink, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. When Emily came out, her hair wrapped in a towel, she shot me a curious look. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light and casual. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't push, didn't probe, just grabbed a bottle of water and went to the living room to scroll through Netflix like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It wasn't even close to fine. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Emily was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and steady. My mind was racing, replaying everything I'd seen in those messages. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was more beneath the surface. But confronting her without solid proof, that felt like stepping into quicksand. What if I was wrong? What if this was all some massive misunderstanding, and I ended up destroying our marriage over nothing? I told myself I'd wait. I'd watch, gather more information, and figure out what the hell was really going on. But the seed of doubt had already taken root, and I couldn't stop it from growing that I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my being wanted to storm into that building and demand an explanation. But I stayed put. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that acting on raw emotion rarely ends well. I needed to keep my cool, to figure out exactly what was going on before I confronted Emily. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Through the large glass windows of the community center, I saw groups of people chatting and laughing as they made their way into classrooms. It all looked perfectly innocent, but my gut told me otherwise. I was about to give up and leave when something caught my eye, a light flickering on in one of the side rooms. I shifted in my seat, craning my neck to get a better view. There they were, Emily and Pierre, standing just inside the room. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, while she sat perched on the edge of a chair, her legs crossed. They were talking, but I couldn't hear a word. Emily tossed her head back, laughing at something he said, and my stomach churned. She hadn't laughed like that around me in months. They didn't stay in the classroom for long. About 15 minutes later, they walked out side by side. I slumped down in my seat, hoping they wouldn't see me. They headed to what looked like a storage closet down the hall. My pulse quickened. What were they doing? Was this part of the class? Why would they need to go into a storage closet together? I watched as they disappeared inside, the door clicking shut behind them. 10 minutes passed, then 20. By the time 30 minutes had gone by, I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was racing, filling in the blanks with scenarios I didn't want to imagine. Every logical thought, maybe they're just sorting supplies, maybe they're discussing class materials, was drowned out by the loud, undeniable truth screaming in my gut. Something was wrong. I got out of my car and started walking toward the building. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I didn't have a plan. What was I even going to do if I found them in there? But I couldn't just sit in the parking lot, torturing myself with what-ifs. As I approached the entrance, I hesitated. A group of people was walking out, chatting in French and laughing. I stepped to the side, letting them pass. When the coast was clear, I slipped inside, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. The building was quieter now, most of the classrooms empty. I made my way down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I found the storage closet easily. It was the only door at the end of the hallway. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My mind was racing. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head? But then I thought of the way she laughed with him, the way she guarded her phone, the words "to me manques déjà." I had to know. I reached out, gripping the doorknob, and gave it a firm twist. Locked. The rational part of me thought, maybe they really are just in there doing something normal. No one locks a door unless they have a reason. But the darker part of my mind, the part fueled by suspicion and fear, was louder. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any sound from inside. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, I heard muffled voices. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it didn't sound like two people discussing textbooks or lesson plans. It sounded intimate. I stepped back, my hands trembling. My face felt hot, my chest tight. I wanted to bang on the door, to demand they come out and explain themselves, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was shame. I didn't want to be that guy. The guy who jumps to conclusions and makes a scene. But deep down, I knew I wasn't jumping to anything. The evidence was piling up, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. I turned and walked back down the hall, my legs feeling like jelly. By the time I reached the parking lot, my head was spinning. I got in my car, slammed the door, and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I felt like I was going to be sick. 15 minutes later, Emily walked out of the building, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She didn't see me sitting there. I watched as she got into her car, took a moment to check her reflection in the mirror, and drove off. I didn't follow her this time. I just sat there, staring after her taillights, feeling like my entire world was unraveling. When Emily came home that night, I was waiting in the living room. I hadn't planned on confronting her yet. Something in me still wanted to gather more proof before I laid everything out, but as soon as I saw her walk through the door, my resolve cracked. She looked radiant. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and she had this little smile playing on her lips, like she'd just come back from a perfect date. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. "What are you still doing up? You've got work in the morning." "I couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice stiff. "How was class?" Her smile faltered, just for a second. "It was fine. We learned some new phrases and went over our conversational skills. Pierre gave us some tips on pronunciation. It's harder than I thought." I nodded, watching her closely. "You look happy." She froze for half a second, then recovered with a laugh. "Of course I'm happy. It's nice to have something to focus on that isn't the kids or laundry." "Why? Do I not look happy around you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned back on the couch and crossed my arms. "So, what was Pierre's big lesson tonight? Anything useful?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Just more practice. You know, the usual." The way she avoided my eyes made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I forced myself to stay calm. Instead, I smiled tightly and said, "You should show me some of what you've learned." "I'd love to hear it." Emily laughed nervously. "Oh, please. You know my accent is terrible. Maybe when I'm more confident." "Sure," I said, my tone flat. "Whenever you're ready." She mumbled something about being tired and headed toward the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd stood, my thoughts spiraling. The secrecy, the lies, they were suffocating. And yet, a small part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for all of this. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. If Emily wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. When she left to drop the kids at school, I went straight to her bag. I know it was a low move, but at this point, I didn't care about playing fair. Her French notebook was tucked inside, along with some pens and loose papers. I flipped through the notebook, scanning the pages for anything that might confirm my suspicions. Most of it was harmless, vocabulary lists, basic phrases, but then I came across a page near the back that stopped me cold. "Je rêve de toi." I dream of you. Beneath it, there was a note in handwriting that wasn't hers. "Et moi de toi, mon amour." "And I of you, my love." I stared at the words, my hands trembling. The handwriting was small and elegant, definitely not Emily's. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Whoever wrote this wasn't just her teacher. He was something more. I took a picture of the page with my phone, then carefully put everything back the way I found it. I didn't want Emily to know I'd been snooping. Not yet. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. At work, I kept replaying everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard. The words in the notebook, the locked storage closet, the look on Emily's face when she came home, it all pointed to the same conclusion. But I still didn't have hard proof. Not the kind of undeniable evidence that would force her to come clean. That evening, I decided to test her. Over dinner, I casually mentioned that I'd been thinking about taking a French class myself. It might be fun, I said, keeping my tone light. I could join you at the community center. Maybe even learn from Pierre. Her reaction was immediate. She nearly dropped her fork. Why would you want to do that? She asked, her voice an octave higher than usual. I shrugged. I don't know. It seems interesting. Plus, it'd be nice to spend some time together. Emily's smile was strained. You'd hate it, she said quickly. It's all grammar drills and pronunciation exercises. Honestly, it's pretty boring. Doesn't seem boring to you, I said, my eyes narrowing. She blinked, caught off guard. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You come home glowing after every class. Seems like you're having a great time. Emily forced a laugh. I guess I just enjoy learning something new. It's fulfilling. I didn't push further, but her reaction spoke volumes. She didn't want me anywhere near that class. Or Pierre. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up late, scrolling through her social media, looking for any connections to him. Nothing. Either she was being incredibly careful, or they were only communicating through other means. The next step was clear. I needed to see them together again. Whatever was happening between them, I'd find out. And this time, I wouldn't be sitting in my car, watching from the shadows. I'd confront them. The next Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Every moment until then was agony, filled with paranoia and doubt. I watched Emily like a hawk, scrutinizing every move she made, every word she said. And every time she picked up her phone or left the room to take a call, my heart sank a little more. The trust that once anchored our relationship was unraveling fast. By the time Thursday rolled around, I had a plan. I'd let her leave for her so-called French class, and this time, I'd follow her inside. I didn't know what I'd find, but I couldn't stand the waiting, the not knowing. I needed answers, real ones. That evening, Emily got ready as usual. She wore a sleek black dress, understated but elegant, paired with the gold necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary a few years ago. It twisted something in my chest to see her wearing that, like she was flaunting my love while hiding her betrayal. You look nice, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave me a quick smile. Thanks. It's just for class. You know, Pierre's always pushing us to dress the part for conversational exercises. Dress the part? My jaw tightened, but I forced a nod. Makes sense. Have fun. I watched as she grabbed her bag and walked out the door, her heels clicking against the pavement. The second she was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time, I wasn't going to sit outside like some passive spectator. If something was going on, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I parked a few spots away from her car at the community center and waited until she went inside. Then I slipped out of my car and followed, keeping my distance. The hallway was quieter than I expected, most of the classrooms empty. I spotted Emily entering a room at the far end of the hall, where the faint sound of French phrases floated out. I stood outside the door for a moment, debating whether to go in. Through the small window, I could see about a dozen people sitting at desks, notebooks open, all of them laughing at something Pierre said. He stood at the front of the room, effortlessly charming in a crisp white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. Emily was sitting near the front, leaning forward, smiling wider than I'd seen her smile in months. I was about to turn away, to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, when something happened that froze me in place. Pierre leaned down next to Emily, whispering something in her ear. She laughed softly, biting her lip in a way I hadn't seen since we were dating. The way she looked at him, it wasn't the way you look at a teacher. I clenched my fists, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't a classroom dynamic. This was something else entirely. But still, I needed more. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. I decided to wait until the class was over. Standing just out of sight, I bided my time as students began to trickle out one by one. Emily lingered, of course, chatting with Pierre as the room emptied. My heart pounded as I watched them through the window. They were standing closer than necessary, their conversation too animated, too intimate. Finally, Pierre motioned toward the door, and Emily followed him out. I ducked into an alcove as they passed, their laughter echoing down the hall. They headed toward the same storage closet as before. I followed at a safe distance, my pulse racing. When I reached the closet, I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted. Locked. I knocked loudly, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. There was a long pause, and then the door opened just a crack. Pierre's face appeared, a picture of calm professionalism, except for the faint flush on his cheeks. "Can I help you?" he asked in a smooth, heavily accented voice. Behind him, I could see Emily, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and panic. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Yeah," I said, my voice hard. "I need to talk to my wife." Pierre raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Emily stepped forward, pushing the door open fully. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "I could ask you the same thing," I shot back. "Care to explain why you're in a locked room with your teacher?" Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She glanced back at Pierre, who gave her a small nod, then turned to me. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly. "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty bad." Pierre stepped in, his voice calm and measured. "Monsieur, please. This is a misunderstanding. We were simply discussing additional materials for her lessons." "Really?" I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "And you needed to lock the door for that?" Emily flinched, but Pierre didn't miss a beat. "The door locks automatically. It's for security reasons." I didn't believe him for a second, but before I could press further, Emily grabbed my arm. "Can we talk about this at home?" she asked, her voice pleading. "You're making a scene." I looked at her, then at Pierre and back again. My gut screamed at me to call them out right there, to demand the truth, but something in Emily's expression gave me pause. She looked desperate, not guilty, exactly, but like someone who was terrified of what might happen next. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "We'll talk at home." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the hallway. But as I reached the door to the parking lot, I glanced back. Pierre was still watching me, his face unreadable. And Emily, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him. The tension in the house was suffocating. Emily and I barely spoke after the confrontation outside the storage closet. She spent the next day acting like nothing had happened, smiling at the kids, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I was on edge, my mind racing with questions I didn't have answers to. The worst part? She hadn't even tried to explain herself. After brushing me off with Pierre's excuses and her half-hearted denial, she retreated into silence, leaving me to stew in my own doubts. But I couldn't let it go. That evening, I decided to dig deeper. If Emily wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. While she was upstairs putting the kids to bed, I grabbed her laptop from the kitchen counter and opened it. She rarely used it anymore, but something told me to check. Her email was still logged in. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the inbox, scanning for anything unusual. At first, it was the usual stuff: receipts, newsletters, PDA announcements. But then I saw an email chain labeled private, Thursday plans. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The emails were between Emily and Pierre. They started innocently enough, details about the class, notes on upcoming lessons. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. "Pierre, I can't wait for Thursday. It's the highlight of my week." Emily, "Mine too. You always make me feel so appreciated." Pierre, "You deserve to be appreciated, mon étoile. I hope you know how special you are." The words felt like a slap to the face. They weren't explicit, but the intimacy was undeniable. These weren't just emails between a teacher and a student. They were something more. And then, buried in the middle of the chain, was an attachment, a photo of Emily, taken in what looked like the community center's classroom. She was sitting at a desk, smiling at the camera, her hair falling over one shoulder in a way that looked almost staged. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. When Emily came downstairs a few minutes later, she immediately froze. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. I held up her laptop. "Explain this," I said, my voice low and trembling with anger. Her eyes flicked to the laptop, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Emily," I snapped. "I saw the emails. You and Pierre planning your little special Thursdays. You think I wouldn't find out?" She paled, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "It's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare use that line," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the way you talk to him, the way he talks to you. Mon étoile? Really? Is that what you are to him? His star?" Emily's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. "You had no right to go through my emails," she said coldly. "No right?" I echoed, my voice incredulous. "I'm your husband. I have every right to know why you're sneaking around and locking yourself in closets with another man." She flinched but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbearable. Finally, I said, "You need to tell me the truth, Emily. Right now. What's going on between you and Pierre?" Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she replied. "We're friends. That's it. I swear." "Friends don't talk like that," I said, my voice breaking. "Friends don't call each other my star. Friends don't send each other pictures like the one he has of you." She hesitated, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face. "It's just, he makes me feel seen," she admitted quietly. "He listens to me. He cares about what I have to say. And I don't." I shot back. Emily looked away, her silence cutting deeper than any words could have. Emily's silence was deafening. She didn't deny it, didn't fight back, didn't even try to placate me with excuses. Instead, she just stood there, staring at the floor like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar. It should have made me feel victorious, but it didn't. It felt like a gut punch. I shook my head, pacing the living room. "You know what's crazy?" I said, my voice trembling. I could have handled the truth, whatever it was. But this? The sneaking, the lying to this. I gestured toward the laptop. "This is what's killing me." Emily finally looked up, her eyes red and glassy. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "Stop saying that." I exploded. "If it's not what I think, then what is it, Emily? What the hell is going on between you and Pierre?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she was finally going to come clean. But instead, she said, "We're friends, and maybe it's complicated. But I never slept with him. I never crossed that line." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so you're saying it's just emotional? Great. That makes it so much better." Her face twisted with anger, and for the first time that night, she fought back. "You don't get it, do you?" she snapped. "I've been lonely for years, Matt. Years. You're so busy with work, with everything else, that you barely even see me anymore. Pierre, he makes me feel like I matter." The words stung, but they also made my blood boil. "Don't you dare put this on me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I work my butt off to provide for this family, to give you and the kids a good life. And your response is to run to someone else because you feel a little neglected?" "I'm not running to anyone," she shot back. "But you haven't been there for me in a long time, Matt. Maybe if you had, this wouldn't have happened." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a noose. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't justifying her behavior. She was blaming me for it. I took a step back, shaking my head. "Unbelievable." I muttered. "You're actually trying to make me the bad guy here." Emily crossed her arms, her expression a mix of defiance and guilt. "I'm not saying it's all your fault," she said quietly. "But you can't pretend you didn't play a part in this." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved and trusted for 8 years, and felt like I didn't even recognize her anymore. "You know what?" I said, my voice hollow. "I'm done talking. If you want to keep defending him and blaming me, fine. But I'm not going to stand here and let you rewrite reality to make yourself feel better." I turned and walked out of the living room, heading straight for the bedroom. I didn't want to be near her. I didn't want to hear her excuses. All I wanted was to escape the suffocating weight of the truth. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with 1,000 unanswered questions. Was she telling the truth about not sleeping with Pierre? Or was that just another lie to keep me from leaving? And even if she was telling the truth, did it really matter? She'd already betrayed me, emotionally if not physically. The next morning, Emily was up before me, making breakfast for the kids like it was any other day. She didn't even look at me as I walked into the kitchen. The air between us was ice cold, heavy with unspoken tension. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching her move around the kitchen. She was trying so hard to act normal, to pretend that nothing had happened. But I couldn't let it go. "We're not done talking about this," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence. Emily paused, her back to me, her shoulders tensing. "I know," she said after a moment. "But not now. Not in front of the kids." Her tone was so calm, so measured, that it made me angrier. She was treating this like it was just another marital spat, something we could sweep under the rug and deal with later. But this wasn't just a fight. This was our marriage. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay quiet. The kids didn't need to hear any of this. But as I watched Emily butter toast and pour orange juice like nothing was wrong, I felt a storm brewing inside me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Emily continued pretending everything was fine, keeping up the facade of the perfect wife and mother. Meanwhile, I was drowning in my own thoughts, replaying every moment of our confrontation and questioning everything she'd said. Did I believe her? Not even close. Her excuses felt hollow, her explanations carefully worded to avoid outright confession. And the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that there was more to the story, more she wasn't telling me. That evening, once the kids were in bed, I decided it was time to stop playing nice. Emily was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, when I walked in. She glanced up at me, her expression guarded. "We need to talk," I said firmly. She sighed, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "Matt, I don't want to keep going in circles about this." "Well, too bad," I shot back. "Because I'm not going to just drop it. I deserve the truth, Emily. All of it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. I sat down across from her, leaning forward, my eyes locked on hers. "You keep saying it's not what I think. Fine. Then tell me what it is. Tell me why you're sneaking around with Pierre. Why you're writing him messages like I dream of you. Explain that to me." Emily's eyes darted away, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she took a deep breath and said, "I told you, it's not physical. We've just been talking. He's someone I can confide in, someone who listens." "Confide in?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "About what? How terrible your husband is. How hard your life is." Her face flushed with anger. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own home, to feel like you're just there, like a piece of furniture." I stared at her, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "So your solution is to start a secret relationship with another man?" I said coldly. "That's how you fix things?" Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said softly. I was lonely. And Pierre, you made me feel like I mattered again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. As much as I wanted to stay angry, there was a part of me, a small, grudging part, that understood what she was saying. I hadn't been the best husband. I'd been consumed by work, by the pressures of providing for our family, and I hadn't noticed how distant we'd become. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What? Do you love him?" I repeated, the words like acid in my mouth. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt my heart break all over again. "No," she said finally. "It's not love. It's just a connection. Something I needed." I didn't know whether to believe her or not. Every instinct told me there was still more she wasn't saying, more she was keeping hidden. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Have you slept with him?" Emily's eyes filled with tears again, and she shook her head. No, she said, her voice trembling. I swear to you, Matt, it's never gone that far. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming tide of doubt. Her words didn't match her actions, and my gut told me she was holding something back. You've been lying to me for months, I said. How am I supposed to believe you now? Emily didn't have an answer for that. She just looked at me, her eyes pleading, like she wanted me to let it go. But I couldn't. After a long, heavy silence, I stood up. I need some air, I said, grabbing my jacket. Matt, wait, she started, but I didn't let her finish. I walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. I got in my car and drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past me as my mind raced. I didn't know what to do, what to think. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the other part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot that I didn't come home for hours. I drove around aimlessly, the streets glowing under streetlights, my mind racing in circles. Emily's words replayed in my head. Her claims that it wasn't physical, that she was just lonely, that it was a connection. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the doubt clawing at my gut. Eventually, I parked at an all-night diner, grabbed a corner booth, and ordered coffee I didn't want. I stared out the window, my reflection staring back at me, hollow-eyed and tired. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Confronting Emily hadn't given me the closure I needed. It had only raised more questions. Was she telling the truth about Pierre? Was it really just emotional? And even if it was, could I ever forgive her for crossing that line? As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and saw a notification from our shared calendar. A reminder popped up. Emily, Thursday French class, 6:30 p.m. I felt a spark of determination flare in my chest. If Emily wasn't going to give me the full truth, I'd find it myself. The next day, while she was out running errands, I decided to go digging. My first stop was her laptop. She had changed her email password, which told me two things. One, she was trying to cover her tracks, and two, she wasn't as innocent as she claimed. Frustrated but not deterred, I moved on to her phone. She had taken to keeping it locked and on her at all times, but I'd noticed she left it charging in the kitchen while she showered. I waited until the moment was right, then snatched it up. Her messages were clean, too clean. No thread from Pierre, no suspicious emojis, nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew better than to stop there. I opened her photo gallery, scrolling through the recent pictures. At first, it was the usual family photos, random shots of the kids, a few selfies. But then I found a folder titled Drafts. My breath caught as I opened it. There were dozens of photos of Emily, some innocent, some not so much. One in particular made my stomach churn, a picture of her sitting in what I recognized as Pierre's classroom. Her head tilted coyly, her lips slightly parted. The angle was intimate, too intimate for a teacher-student relationship. I snapped a photo of it with my phone, my hands trembling. Next, I opened her browsing history. Most of it was mundane, but one search caught my eye. How to say I love you in French. My blood went cold. I put her phone back before she finished her shower, then sat in the living room, my mind racing. I couldn't let this continue. Whatever was happening between her and Pierre needed to end now. That evening, I decided to pay Pierre a visit. I waited until Emily left for her class, then followed her, keeping a safe distance. Once she was inside the community center, I parked and made my way to the entrance. This time, I didn't hover in the shadows or hide in my car. I walked straight into the building, my steps echoing loudly in the quiet hallway. I spotted Pierre's classroom easily. It was the one with the faint sound of French phrases drifting out. I didn't bother waiting for the class to end. I knocked on the door hard. The chatter inside fell silent. A moment later, the door opened, and there he was, Pierre, looking surprised but annoyingly composed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his accent smooth and deliberate. "Yeah, you can," I said, stepping into the room. The students, including Emily, all turned to stare. Emily's face went pale when she saw me. "Matt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Pierre. "We need to talk. Now." Pierre glanced at Emily, then back at me. Perhaps we can discuss this in private, he suggested, his tone calm but cautious. No, I said firmly. We're doing this right here, right now. Emily stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Matt, stop, she pleaded. You're making a scene. Good. I snapped, my voice rising. Maybe it's time for everyone to know what's really going on here. Pierre's calm facade cracked slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. I assure you, there's nothing inappropriate happening here, he said. I laughed bitterly. You think I'm stupid? I've seen the emails. I've seen the photos. And I've seen the way you look at her. Gasps rippled through the room as the other students exchanged shocked glances. Emily looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Matt, please, she said again, her voice shaking. But I wasn't done. I stepped closer to Pierre, my fists clenched. You've been playing games with my wife, and I'm not going to stand for it. So, I'll ask you one time, are you involved with her? Pierre opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, Emily stepped between us. That's enough, she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. Let's go. I looked at her, anger and betrayal warring inside me. Not until I get the truth, I said, my voice low. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. And in her silence, I found my answer. The silence in that classroom was suffocating. The other students stared at us, wide-eyed, as if they'd wandered into a live soap opera. Emily stood between Pierre and me, her face pale and streaked with tears, while Pierre maintained his calm, collected facade. But I wasn't calm, not even close. My chest was tight, my fists clenched, and every instinct in me screamed for answers. Emily, I said, my voice low but firm, if you don't want me to ask him, then you'd better tell me right now. Are you involved with him? Her lower lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But instead, she said, let's talk about this at home. Please, Matt. I'm done talking at home, I snapped. We've had plenty of those conversations, and you keep dodging the truth. I'm not leaving here until I get a straight answer. Pierre raised a hand, as if to calm the situation. Monsieur, he said, his voice soft. I understand your frustration, but I assure you, there is nothing inappropriate happening between Emily and me. I turned on him, my temper flaring. You think I'm an idiot? I've seen the emails, the photos, the late nights locked in closets. Don't stand there and act innocent when you've been crossing every boundary imaginable with my wife. Emily let out a soft sob, and I glanced at her. You've been lying to me for months, I said, my voice cracking. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To us? I don't even know who you are anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Pierre stepped forward. With all due respect, he said, his tone steady, I think you are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Emily is a dedicated student. Nothing more. His words were measured, almost rehearsed, and it made my blood boil. Dedicated student? I scoffed. Is that what you call it when she sends you pictures of herself? When she looks up how to say, I love you in French? A collective gasp rippled through the room, and Emily's face crumpled in horror. Matt, stop, she cried, her voice shaking. I ignored her. So, tell me, Pierre, do you tell all your dedicated students that they're your stars? Or is that just an Emily thing? His calm demeanor finally cracked. His jaw tightened, and he glanced at Emily, who looked like she wanted to disappear. Matt, enough! Emily shouted, stepping forward. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes burned with anger. You're embarrassing yourself, and me in front of everyone. Let's go home. No, I said, shaking my head. Not until I get the truth. She hesitated, glancing at Pierre, and in that moment, I saw everything I needed to see. The guilt in her eyes, the silent exchange between them. It was all the confirmation I needed. I let out a bitter laugh. That's it, isn't it? You can't even look me in the eye and deny it. Matt, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's not what you think. I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice hollow. I can't keep living in this limbo, wondering if my wife is being honest with me or sneaking around behind my back. Emily reached out to me, her hand trembling. Please, she said. Let's go home and talk. Just you and me. We can figure this out. I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on me like a wave. Finally, I said, "I'll go home, but I don't think there's anything left to figure out." Her face crumpled, and she started to sob, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I turned and walked out of the classroom, ignoring the stunned whispers of the students behind me. Back in the car, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, as I stared at the dashboard. My world was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. For so long, I'd hoped that there was an explanation, that Emily's behavior could be justified somehow. But now, I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. When I got home, the house was quiet, the kids already asleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Pictures of us on vacations, birthdays, moments that felt like they belonged to a different life. Emily came home about an hour later. She walked in slowly, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, she spoke. "Matt," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I never wanted it to get this far." I looked at her, my heart breaking all over again. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know," she said. "I was lonely, and he made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. But I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice trembling. "You destroyed us." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't even look at her. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. And in that silence, I realized that the life we'd built together, the life I thought was unshakable, was gone. The house felt colder after that night, like the betrayal had seeped into the walls, tainting everything it touched. Emily and I existed under the same roof, but we were barely speaking. The kids were the only thing keeping us tethered, their innocent questions and laughter serving as a painful reminder of what was at stake. I slept on the couch, refusing to share a bed with her. She didn't argue. Instead, she'd retreat to the bedroom every night, shutting the door softly, as if trying not to disturb me. But the truth was, nothing about our life was undisturbed anymore. For days, we circled around the elephant in the room, exchanging only brief, strained conversations about logistics or the kids. Every time I looked at her, I saw the guilt etched into her face, and the anger in mine reflected back at her. I needed answers. Late one night, after tossing and turning on the couch for hours, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and marched to the bedroom. Emily was awake, sitting up in bed with a book in her hands, though she didn't seem to be reading it. She looked up as I entered, her expression wary. "Matt," she said softly, closing the book and setting it on the nightstand. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. "We need to talk." She nodded, like she'd been expecting this. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I stepped into the room, pacing near the foot of the bed. "I need the truth," I said, my tone sharp. "All of it. No more half answers, no more excuses. I need to know exactly what's been going on between you and Pierre." Emily's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she just sat there, staring at her hands. Finally, she said, "I've told you everything. It wasn't physical, Matt. It never went that far." "That's not good enough," I snapped. "You expect me to believe that after all the lies? The emails, the pictures, the private messages? How am I supposed to trust anything you say?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too hurt to feel any sympathy. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't think it would go beyond just talking." "But it did," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't just talk. You wrote him love notes. You sent him pictures. You kept this whole relationship hidden from me. And you think that doesn't count as cheating?" Emily flinched at the word, but she didn't deny it. "I made a mistake," she said softly. "A terrible mistake. But it's over now." "Over?" I laughed bitterly. "It doesn't feel over. Not when I can still see his shadow hanging over everything." She wiped at her tears, her voice trembling as she said, "What do you want me to say, Matt? That I hate myself for what I've done? That I wish I could take it all back? Because I do." I've been beating myself up every day since this started. Then why did you do it? I demanded. Why risk everything we've built for some connection with a stranger? She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I was lonely. I felt invisible. And Pierre, he made me feel wanted again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. As much as I hated to admit it, I could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't making excuses, she was broken, just like I was. But that didn't make her actions any easier to forgive. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can keep looking at you and wondering if you're still hiding something. If you'll do it again. Emily's face crumpled, and she started sobbing. I don't want to lose you, she choked out. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just please don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that the love we'd shared for 8 years was strong enough to survive this betrayal. But a part of me, a dark, bitter part, wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. I need time, I said finally, my voice hollow. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I turned and left the room, shutting the door softly behind me. As I lay on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The anger, the pain, the doubt, it was all too much. But one thought kept echoing in my mind, louder than all the rest. Was there even anything left to save? The days that followed felt like living in a limbo, as if time had slowed to a crawl. Emily and I continued our strained existence under the same roof, barely speaking except to coordinate the necessities of life. The kids seemed to pick up on the tension, their laughter quieter, their questions more cautious. I hated that they could sense something was wrong. They didn't deserve this. None of us did. Meanwhile, my mind raced constantly, caught in an exhausting loop of doubt and anger. I kept replaying Emily's words in my head, the way she'd broken down and begged me not to give up on us. Part of me wanted to believe her, to trust that she was truly sorry and willing to make things right. But another part, the part that had seen the emails and the photos, that had watched her with Pierre, couldn't shake the feeling that the damage was already done. I needed clarity, some kind of resolution. So, on Friday morning after Emily left to drop the kids off at school, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd been debating calling for days. By early afternoon, I was sitting in the back corner of a quiet cafe, nervously tapping my foot against the floor. I'd arranged to meet Pierre. I didn't tell Emily. There was no way she'd have agreed to it, and I wasn't sure if this was the right move. But I couldn't let the uncertainty consume me any longer. I needed to hear his side of the story, no matter how much it hurt. Pierre arrived right on time, wearing a fitted gray blazer and his usual air of effortless charm. He spotted me immediately, his expression unreadable as he approached the table. Monsieur, he said, nodding politely. Thank you for meeting me. I didn't respond, just motioned for him to sit. As he settled into the chair across from me, I studied him carefully. He looked calm, collected, too much so. It grated on me, the way he seemed completely unbothered by the storm he'd helped create in my life. I'll get straight to the point, I said, leaning forward. What's going on between you and Emily? Pierre folded his hands on the table, his expression neutral. I understand why you're upset, he began, his voice measured. But I assure you, Emily and I have not crossed any inappropriate boundaries. Don't give me that, I snapped. I've seen the emails, the photos. I know what's been going on. So spare me the innocent act and tell me the truth. For the first time, a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. He let out a soft sigh and said, You're right. I haven't been completely honest. Emily and we became close. Too close, perhaps. But I swear to you, we never crossed the line physically. I clenched my fists, try to keep my voice steady. Close? That's what you call it? Writing her love notes? Making her feel wanted while I'm at home, trying to keep our family together. Pierre shifted in his seat, his composure slipping slightly. I didn't intend for things to escalate, he said quietly. But Emily, she was vulnerable. She felt unseen, unheard. I was only trying to offer her support. Support? I said, my voice rising. You call that support? You manipulated her. You took advantage of her vulnerability for your own selfish reasons. I didn't manipulate anyone, Pierre shot back, his voice calm but firm. Emily is an intelligent woman. She made her own choices. And if I'm being honest, I believe you bear some responsibility for what happened. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Excuse me? You've neglected her, Pierre continued. You've been so focused on your work, on providing for your family, that you forgot to nurture your relationship. She needed connection, and you weren't there to give it to her. I stared at him, my chest tight with anger. So that justifies what you did? No, he said simply. But perhaps it explains it. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the tension between us almost unbearable. Finally, I said, whatever justification you think you have, it doesn't matter. You crossed the line, and I want you to stay away from my wife. Pierre nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. If that's what she wants, I'll respect her wishes, he said. I stood up, my hands trembling. This isn't about what she wants, I said. It's about what's right, and what's right is for you to walk away. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. Back at home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. She looked up, her expression wary. Where were you? She asked. I hesitated for a moment, then said, I met with Pierre. Her eyes widened in shock. You what? I needed answers, I said, setting my keys on the counter. And I got them. Emily stared at me, her face pale. Matt, save it, I said, cutting her off. He confirmed what I already knew. You got too close, you crossed lines, and you lied to me about it. And now I'm supposed to just believe that it's over. She looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't know what else I can do to prove it to you, she said softly. I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. I want to fix us. Her words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. But I wasn't sure if they were enough. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Emily, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And as I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there in silence, I realized I was no closer to an answer than I'd been the day I discovered her betrayal. After my confrontation with Pierre, things in the house grew even colder. Emily avoided me most of the time, as if sensing that I was a powder keg waiting to explode. And maybe I was. The tension was unbearable. Every glance between us weighted with unspoken anger, guilt, and exhaustion. I couldn't stop thinking about what Pierre had said. She needed connection, and you weren't there to give it to her. His words gnawed at me, even though I hated him for saying them. Was he right? Had I failed as a husband? Or was that just another excuse to justify Emily's betrayal? The doubts consumed me. I started noticing little things, ways Emily seemed to be trying harder. She cooked dinner more often, even making my favorite meals without asking. She started wearing her wedding ring again, a gesture that only reminded me of the time she hadn't. And she began asking me questions about work, about the kids, about my life, as if trying to reconnect. But I wasn't ready to play along. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Emily approached me in the living room. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when she sat down beside me, her presence a hesitant weight. Matt, she began softly, can we talk? I didn't look at her. About what? She sighed. About us. About everything. I set my phone down, finally meeting her gaze. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She looked as exhausted as I felt. Okay, I said flatly. Talk. She hesitated, wringing her hands. I know I've hurt you, she said finally. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I need you to know that I'm done with Pierre. Completely. I blocked his number. I dropped the French class. I even told him to stay away if he ever tries to contact me again. Her words hit me like a wave, but I didn't let my face betray my thoughts. Why now? I asked. Why do all of that after months of lying? Is it because you're sorry? Or is it because you finally got caught? Emily flinched, and I saw tears well up in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I was selfish and I let things go too far. But it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I felt like I'd lost you. Her words twisted something deep in my chest. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her pain as proof that she still cared. But another part of me, the part that had watched her walk out the door to see Pierre week after week, couldn't forget what she'd done. I don't know if love is enough, I said quietly. Emily's face crumpled. I'll do anything to fix this, she said. Anything, Matt. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just tell me what you need. I stared at her, my thoughts racing. Did I even know what I needed? Could therapy erase the image of her smiling at another man, laughing at his jokes, writing him intimate messages? Could anything rebuild what we'd lost? I need time, I said finally, my voice heavy. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Okay, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Just please don't give up on us. The days dragged on, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a stone. Emily kept her distance, but she didn't stop trying. Every gesture, every meal she cooked, every kind word she offered, felt like a plea for forgiveness. But I couldn't shake the doubt. One night, as I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, I decided to do something I hadn't dared to do yet. I opened my laptop and started searching for a therapist. Not for us, for me. I needed to make sense of my feelings, to figure out what I wanted and whether I could ever truly move forward. The next week, I found myself sitting in a small office with a soft-spoken therapist named Dr. Callahan. She listened patiently as I spilled everything. How I discovered Emily's betrayal, how I confronted Pierre, how the doubt and anger were tearing me apart. Do you still love her? Dr. Callahan asked gently. The question made my chest tighten. I don't know, I admitted. I think I do, but I don't know if that's enough anymore. She nodded thoughtfully. Love is important, but so is trust. And right now, it sounds like your trust in her has been deeply damaged. Completely shattered, I said bitterly. Dr. Callahan leaned forward slightly. Trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and effort from both people. The question is, do you believe she's willing to do the work? And are you willing to let her? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. As I left the session, her words stayed with me. Could trust really be rebuilt? And even if it could, was I willing to go through the pain of trying? When I got home, Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked at me expectantly, her hands twisting nervously. How was it? She asked softly. It was fine, I said, brushing past her. But as I headed to the living room, a thought struck me. If I couldn't answer those questions, then maybe we were already finished. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the wall. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Emily had retreated to the bedroom hours ago, and the kids were fast asleep. Yet, I couldn't find peace in the silence. Dr. Callahan's words echoed in my mind. Do you believe she's willing to do the work? And are you willing to let her? I didn't know. Every part of me was at war. My anger and hurt screamed at me to walk away, to leave Emily to the wreckage she'd caused. But my love for her, the memories of the life we'd built together, pulled me in the opposite direction. I couldn't sit with the uncertainty any longer. I got up and went to the bedroom, opening the door softly. Emily was lying in bed, facing away from me, but I could tell she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was too uneven. Emily, I said quietly. She rolled over, her eyes red and puffy. What is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. No more half answers. No more excuses. She nodded slowly, sitting up. Okay. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. Why did you keep lying? After I confronted you, after I found the messages, after everything, why couldn't you just tell me the truth? Emily looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Because I was scared, she admitted. I was scared of losing you, scared of what you'd think of me. And I was ashamed. I didn't want to admit to myself how far I'd let things go. Her words stung, but there was a raw honesty in them that I hadn't seen before. Do you even understand what you've done to me? I asked, my voice trembling. What you've done to us? She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Yes, she said. I think about it every single day. I hate myself for what I've done, Matt. And if I could take it back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is try to make it right. I studied her, searching for any sign of deception. But all I saw was guilt and pain. Why Pierre? I asked. Out of all the people in the world, why him? Emily hesitated, then said, because he was there. He listened, and he made me feel special. Her voice broke on the last word, and I felt my anger flare again. Special, I said bitterly. I was right here, Emily. I've always been here. But instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I was wrong. I should have come to you. I should have told you how I was feeling instead of looking for it somewhere else. But I didn't, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Do you still think about him? I asked quietly. Emily's eyes widened in shock. No, she said quickly. Not at all. I ended it, Matt. I blocked his number. I cut him out of my life completely. He's gone. I nodded, though her answer didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Emily sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Please, she choked out. Please don't give up on me. On us. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I swear. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of her words pressed down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the chance to prove she could change. But another part, the part that had been broken by her betrayal, wasn't sure if I had the strength to try. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing quietly behind me. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the chaos at home. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the pain was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. One evening, while cleaning out the garage, I came across a box of old photo albums. I opened one, flipping through pictures of our wedding, our first house, the day our kids were born. Each photo was a snapshot of a happier time, a reminder of what we'd built together. And as I stared at those pictures, I realized something. I didn't want to lose that life. But I also didn't know if I could forgive her. The days dragged on, each one a battle between my heart and my pride. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or walk away. Forgiving Emily felt like a betrayal of my own pain, yet the idea of losing her, of losing the life we'd built, was just as unbearable. She noticed the struggle, of course. Emily was careful around me, her every word measured, her every action an attempt to show she was trying. She'd stopped wearing makeup, dressed more modestly, and spent more time with the kids, throwing herself into their routines as if to prove she was still the mother and wife she used to be. But none of that erased what she'd done. One night, about a week after our last real conversation, Emily approached me in the living room. She stood there for a moment, clutching a piece of paper in her hands, before taking a deep breath and sitting across from me. I need to say something, she said, her voice steady but soft. I set my phone down and crossed my arms. Go ahead. She handed me the paper, her hands trembling slightly. I've been writing this all week. I wanted to get it right. I glanced at the paper, then back at her. What is it? It's an apology, she said. A real one. Reluctantly, I unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear Matt, I don't know if words are enough to fix what I've done, but I need you to hear them anyway. I need you to know how sorry I am for everything, for lying to you, for betraying your trust, for turning to someone else when I should have turned to you. What I did was selfish and wrong, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I know I hurt you deeply, and I know I've broken something between us that might never fully heal. But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we've lost. I'll go to therapy. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you can trust me again. I'll do anything, because you're the love of my life, and I can't imagine a future without you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope that someday you'll find it in your heart to give me another chance. And if you can't, I'll understand, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read her words, though I quickly blinked them away. I looked up at her, unsure of what to say. "Did you mean all of this?" I asked, my voice rough. "Every word," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. I set the letter down, running a hand through my hair. "You know this doesn't just fix things, right?" "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not expecting it to. I needed you to know how I feel." Her vulnerability was almost painful to watch. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with. The woman who, despite her mistakes, still held a piece of my heart. But forgiveness wasn't just about love. It was about trust and rebuilding that felt like an impossible task. "Emily," I said, my voice heavy, "I want to believe you. I really do. But I don't know if I can." "Not yet." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I'll wait," she said. "However long it takes, I'll wait. Just don't give up on us." I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my jacket. As I walked through the quiet streets, the crisp night air stung my face, but it did little to clear my mind. I thought about the letter, about her tearful plea, and about the life we'd built together. Could we really fix this? Could I ever look at her without seeing the shadow of her betrayal? I found myself at the park where we used to take the kids on weekends. The swings creaked in the breeze, the faint sound tugging at my heart. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground, and tried to imagine a future without her. The thought made my chest ache. Maybe Dr. Callahan was right. Maybe trust could be rebuilt, but only if I was willing to let it. And maybe, just maybe, Emily deserved the chance to try. When I got home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She looked up as I walked in, hope flickering in her gaze. I sat down across from her, the silence stretching between us. Finally, I said, if we try to fix this, it's going to be hard. Really hard. And I'm not promising anything." Emily nodded quickly, her tears starting again. "I understand," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes. I swear." I took a deep breath, the weight of my decision settling over me. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's try." Her sobs turned into quiet relief as she reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. For the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away.